Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I have been devoting this year to the reading of literature out of early China or books about that period. The project began simply as an effort to read some of the Penguin classics and whatnot that had gathered on my shelves over the years, but it has expanded and I've found myself picking up other books along the way. Not that long ago, I read the Zhuo tradition, or Zhuoyuan, published by University of Washington Press, and found it to be a delightful reading experience. And not only that, I felt that physically the volumes, it was 3 volumes in a box, were just the pinnacle of what one could hope for in a bilingual edition of a Chinese text. And so, noting that the publishing house had a few other books offered, I decided to pick them up. And I really came across a winner with this book, The Garden of Eloquence, or the Shuoyuan. Now, it gives Xiang credit as author. He was certainly the compiler and probably the finisher up of the text, so I'm sure the words that you read really did come from his pen, more or less. Certainly under his watchful supervision. It is really a book that I'm glad I didn't pass up. I've been picking up works here and there, not really knowing what they are, just knowing that they come from the early time period. And so before this, I had read a commentary on the Documents classic. I may have talked about it, not exactly a favorite book of mine. And now I am reading this one, Exemplary Figures. And once again, I am not particularly warming to the text. It's fine, but the author in that case seems rather full of himself and seems to be doing a lot of posturing. If you read much into the literature that arose from the spring and autumn period through the Warring States period, you will find mostly what you get is a lot of compendiums of anecdotes or stories, all pertaining to government or to good governance. I say all pertaining, that might be a slight exaggeration, but that is the main thrust of these bodies of literature. They were compiled in various ways by various hands for various purposes. And as the introduction here says, I think there were just so many of them that come the time of the Han Dynasty, Liu Xiang decided to just take up as many as he could find and put them into a book of its own. So there is inevitably in these ancient Chinese collections some duplication or the same story told in a different way. Sometimes it's the same story told with different characters, the same anecdote, but different protagonists have been slotted into the roles. But be that as it may, overall, this has to be one of the best compendiums of the lot for a variety of reasons. When I read recently the Huainanzi, I remarked upon just how polished it felt to me, as opposed to the literature that was from a little bit earlier in time. And I think one might make the claim for this book as well. And then another aspect of this book that I like is that, except for a brief phase in the 18th chapter, it almost completely avoids all of the yin-yang philosophy, all of the astrological reckonings and so forth, and just presents the stories because they are good stories. The translator notes you should not take this book as history. It is quite a huge book. There are 20 chapters total, a nice number. And I thought that I would share with you the first part of the introduction by Eric Henry. This is Eric Henry. If you were only going to pick one book from the early China corpus, this would not be a bad place to start. It's so chock full of anecdotes that it's not the sort of thing that one must read from cover to cover. You could just read a little bit at a time. BookTube right now is having a short story summer event going on, spearheaded and created initially, I think, by Randy Ray at the Literate Texan. I'll put a link to an explanation video in the description box. But if you had possession of this, you could well read just some stories for that BookTube event, and then come another event, hold off, and perhaps read it again at another time. I think it's a literature that it is good to have some kind of a touchstone with. I certainly did not know what the core of ancient Chinese literature was like. And this, coming just on the heels of that very earliest explosion of literature, it kind of regularizes things and takes the best. And so I don't think that you can go wrong with this book. So let me just read from the introduction, just the very start of it. More than any other individual, Liu Xiang, 79-8 BCE, a scholar official of the late former Han, 206-9 BCE, is responsible for rescuing from oblivion and putting into definitive form the written legacy of pre-imperial and early imperial China. As such, his influence on the subsequent development of Chinese culture was all-pervasive and inescapable. It is scarcely possible to discuss any of the perennial themes of Chinese thought without quoting from texts that, had it not been for Liu Xiang, would never have existed, or would have existed in different and probably vastly inferior form. The philosopher Sunzi, for example, lived and wrote 2 centuries before Liu Xiang. But before Liu Xiang, there was no book called Sunzi. Rather, there were 100 or so loose documents authored by Sunzi in the Imperial Library, some of which were duplicates of each other, and most of which were endangered. It was Liu Xiang who gave shape to this mass of material, and in so doing made it available to future generations. Similarly, Huainanzi, the vast compendium of Taoist and syncretist thought originating in the court of Liu An in mid-2nd century BCE, owes its current existence as a book to Liu Xiang. And Intrigues of the Warring States, Zhan Guoshi, the indispensable collection of legends and rhetoric of the warring states and early Han exists only because Liu Xiang used the contents of 6 poorly preserved precursor texts that were rapidly becoming unusable to create a new book. Zhuangzi, Liezi, and the Annals of Yanzi are 3 more books that owe their present form and perhaps present existence to Liu Xiang. It was he also who first collected the writings that record legends concerning the career and alleged theories of the early 7th century statesman Guanzhong. This became Guanzi, the only early Chinese text that talks at length about economics. Interruption here. In this project, I think it was my acquisition of a volume of that text that really wound up expanding my early China project. The list goes on and on. The classic of filial piety, book of rites, assorted accounts of women, new collation, and garden of eloquence all owe their existence to the editorial work of this one man. Liu Xiang began this work at the age of 53 in 26 BCE, when, as a collator of documents within the palace, he was charged by Emperor Cheng with creating definitive versions of canonic, philosophic, and poetic texts. After his death at the age of 71 in 9 BCE, his work was carried forward by his youngest son, Liu Xin, 50 BCE to 23 CE. But that son eventually, in 26 CE, was swept to destruction by the political currents of his times, committing suicide after the execution of his own 3 sons, Liu Xiang's grandsons. The huge contributions to the preservation and development of Chinese culture detailed above were all made in the course of a career fraught at every point with personal insecurity of the most radical kind. Liu Xiang had been imprisoned and condemned to death at a young age for the perceived crime of attempting to delude the emperor, and in the course of his life he saw friends, patrons, and colleagues on every side pay with their lives for their activities and opinions. To a modern person, the lives of early Chinese statesmen, like the lives of their counterparts in ancient Rome, read like an endless sequence of horrors. It is hard for people of our era to see how anyone living under such conditions could have maintained a devotion to moral principle and intellectual advancement, to anything, in fact, beyond the mere preservation of life, and yet, in countless instances, they seem to have done just that. To those statesmen, no doubt, life at the Han court and at earlier courts still in historical memory seemed normal. They had never known anything different. The ferocious demands imposed on the individual by the conditions of life in those times is reflected in an utterance that appears in item 4.2 of this book. If a person cannot willingly embrace heavy tasks, cannot be content with poverty and hardship, and cannot hold death in contempt, then I shall not believe him if he still says, I am able to act righteously. Liu Xiang himself is described in his Han Shu biography as being an easygoing man free of personal pride who liked to spend his days working on his texts in the imperial library and his nights observing the stars, sometimes foregoing sleep to do so. The fact that Liu Xiang's work took place in the Imperial Library, however, did nothing to insulate him from the political conflicts that raged in the Han court, and his work as a collator was not exclusively aimed at the preservation and transmission of manuscripts, though that did become the chief value of his work to posterity. Liu Xiang held strong views on all the issues of the day, addressed memorials to the emperor on a number of occasions, and did his best to influence the opinions of his colleagues as well. By rescuing the legacy of the past as a manuscript collator, he could help to disseminate correct doctrine, which might in turn help to ameliorate conditions at court. It was partly because he was offended by the excessive power and bad behavior of certain empresses and their relatives that he assembled the noteworthy actions that constitute assorted accounts of women. His desire to improve the political climate of his time is particularly plain in the work to which we shall now turn our attention. Then he goes on to talk about the book itself in greater detail. But that should whet your appetite for this book. It is not small. There are at least 1,200 pages. I think it's like 1,241 pages total. It's bilingual, so the facing page is Chinese, and one page with the English text has its own set of footnotes at the bottom, and the Chinese side has a separate set of footnotes at the bottom. So I have not had much cause at all to go over to the Chinese side, and even in the footnotes, oftentimes it's not really all that necessary. You're getting stories, anecdotes, and so it's not that critical. And even in the front matter, what Eric Henry writes is concise, it's to the point. There are some little glossaries and whatnot which may be helpful to the novice, but it's certainly not too much. Some of these books do have huge introductions to every little bit. I personally would have liked introductions to every chapter, but I can understand his reason for foregoing that. It's already quite a big volume, and certainly not necessary. The 20 chapters are divided according to themes, and as I say, except for a little bit in chapter 18, it mostly is just that, anecdotes, stories, all of which have a kind of moral purport or an ethical substratum, if you will, which is indeed what I like about these early Chinese stories, particularly as it relates to governance, given that in the United States right now, we are replete with malefactors, bad actors, serving personal profit. It is made clear in this text, of course, that in fact, one of the chapters is titled as much, that a degree of impartiality is requisite in serving of the state. Now, the book that I am on now, what is his name? Yang, he is a contemporary. He was working at the Imperial Library at the time. As I say, he's a bit more egotistical, I would say. Liu Xiang, if anything, he did his job. It was not about putting himself in the center. But let me read you a little bit from this. Well, there was something that seemed kind of interesting. Well, here. This is a much shorter work, only about 250 pages maybe. I'm not sure, I haven't peeked ahead yet. Yang's last years from Chengdi's reign through the first half of Wang Mang's Xin dynasty, 9 to 23 CE, must have been incredibly busy. Sometime during the period, 26 to 6 BCE, when the first imperial library collection was being put together, Yang worked under the direction of his mentor, Liu Xiang, organizing and cataloging the library collection. Reportedly, in those capacities, he proved himself to be a good, if activist, editor like Liu Xiang. In a memorial to the throne, Yang characterized himself as a youth sadly deficient in learning. By his own account, he owed his erudition largely to the research he carried out in the Stone Chamber, one of the palace libraries. He and his mentor were intent upon devising reliable methods by which to determine the best among several variant editions or characters in ancient texts. Yang and Liu Xiang have been dubbed the twin fathers of textual criticism in China. During this time, one or possibly two beloved sons, one allegedly a child prodigy, died and had to be taken or sent back to Sichuan for burial. Yang's position at court as resident wisdom bag stuffed with encyclopedic knowledge also meant that learned men of every persuasion regularly consulted him on omens, historical figures, and strange script. By his own account, the historical and literary allusions favored by Yang during these question and answer sessions became the core around which Yang built his exemplary figures. At the same time, Yang was tutoring several young men who were interested in pre-Qin script forms and fine literary expressions, and he functioned as official advisor to members of the court on a variety of matters relating to historical precedents, omen interpretation, and classical learning, and so forth. As I say, this text is not grabbing me as yet. That tells you the supposed origins of this. To me, the chapters read like little dialogues with oneself, less so than the more sort of objective presented dialogue that you would get in a writer that had more of a flavor for drama, I believe. I'm thinking of Oscar Wilde, of course, but the classic of Salt and Iron also comes to mind. But we will see how that goes. At any rate, a multiple thumbs up for this. And well, we'll see how it goes with this. Thank you for stopping by my channel.